Okay, well, and wood engraving actually had a commercial side to it. I mean, certainly artists used wood engraving for book illustration, for standalone lone prints, but the commercial engravers needed to speed up the process of laying in the tones and the tints that were required to get the detail and the essence of an illustration. And anybody that didn't know about a ruling machine would wonder how they ever did such a thing with these precision lines or whatever. And when I met David Sander, who was the last remnant of the Sander Wood Engraving Company, there sitting were a bunch of these machines. Oh my goodness, what are these? And so anybody that's used one just kind of falls in love with the precision that you can get with a ruling machine. So if whatever your boxwood block, or whatever, this just happens to be a round of boxwood, but then of course the engraving, and they would actually sensitize a block, and they could photographically put an image on the block. And then of course the wonderful complex of lines very often were done then with the ruling machine. Certainly you have to go in by hand and do a lot of the handwork, but the ruling machine gave you that precision, that beautiful complex of parallel lines. So a lot of times people will look at engravings from that period in the 20th century, your Sears catalog. All of those things were wood engravings that probably used a ruling machine. People will not believe. Nobody did this. This is not done by hand until you can show them the block. And then they are just blown away. What a great fun machine this is. And you guys are now, you are the torch carriers of this. They're museum pieces.
So we're going to introduce you to the ruling machine, and it's many parts, and just give a demonstration on how to make tints and tones by controlling the depth of your line and the space between them with precision. So this is the, I like to call it the stage, but it's actually the bed of the machine. And I'll just add, I feel like calling it a ruling machine can give the impression that it's mechanized. So just a clarification, nothing is mechanized. This is completely manual. Everything is controlled by gears and ratchets and cranks and dials. So still the human hand and brain has a huge role with this machine. So again, this is the bed of the ruling machine. Here you have the stylus and the burin. It's down here. There's an adjustment dial that raises and lowers the stylus and the burin at very precise increments, very small increments, so that you can make your line weight wider and deeper or more shallow and thin. So to make an engraving in your block, you'll lock your block onto the bed using these dogs. They have, loose adjusters and fine adjusters. And I just like to measure and center the block into the bed and tighten it up.
And how do you find the center on the bed?
Excellent question. Well, depending on your ruling machine or the one you have access to, it has these lines that cross through the center, and I just take a ruler and measure out from the center to do it. So that's how I do that. Okay, I'm just checking my dogs, making sure it's nice and tight. So now when I engrave in my block, it is set on the bed. So to make lines, circles, cross hatching, any of that, I need to move the bed and the burin, not the block. So the bed will move the block and the burin will move. So how do I do that? So this is the kind of horizontal left to right adjustment. You can see there are gears here and there are numbers for adjusting your increments of how far you want the bed to move back and forth. I can disengage this ratchet system, oops, and turn this crank, oops, and you can see the bed is moving quite dramatically. So if I need to make a major adjustment or find the center of my block with the burin or something like that, again, I would disengage the ratchet and just turn this crank and get my block where I want it to be. Excuse me, once I get my block where I want it to, and I begin making lines on my block, there is a stop that I can loosen this and move it back and forth. And there are numbers on this dial.
And so that's just a stop for the ratchet.
This is a stop for the ratchet. So how about if I just go ahead and make a line? I have a plan, so I'm gonna disengage my ratchet. I'm gonna move the bed back to the left quite a bit. I'm gonna make my drawing from right to left. At least that's what I'm gonna attempt to do. Okay, so I've moved the bed over to where I wanna begin my drawing. I'm gonna make my whole drawing down here. I'm defining drawing as a series of lines in this instance, not a masterpiece. Felt my block move a little bit just then. Okay. So I'm gonna make my first line. I'm gonna lift the stylus and I'm gonna turn this crank. So this, you'll see, moves the stylus back and forth. When I get to where I want to begin my line, which is at this mark I made with a marker, I'm gonna drop it down. And for this particular machine, I'm just giving it a gentle finger's weight of pressure on here, and I'm gonna move the stylus through the block. Or I should say, if you can move in, this is the stylus. This lands on the block and steadies the burin as it moves through it. So when I'm using a rolling machine that has this stylus, you always want to make sure it's on the block when you start your mark and you stop your mark while it's still on the block. And that will guarantee that your line depth is uniform from beginning to end. So this is one instance where you would definitely finish that line by hand later. So I can lift that up and back my burin off. And you see I've made a really wide mark. So what I'm going to do is make a series of lines that get further apart and fall over, and the line weight will get lighter as it goes. So to make my next line, I first want to raise my stylus a little bit, and I'm going to do that by turning this dial to the right just a little bit. I also want to move my block over a little bit. So that's where the left to right ratchet comes in. And I'm going to make the space between the lines a little wider than I might want to so that it shows up for the camera. So I'm going 1 and 2 full ratchets. So something else, if you guys play on this machine today, I lift the ratchet when I'm moving it so it doesn't scrape on the brass and wear the brass down. So I ratcheted twice. The bed moved this way. Now you can see I've lowered my stylus and burin, and it's quite a bit further from that line. I also had turned this dial to gently raise the burin, and now I'm just making another line. Okay, subtle. I'm going to raise my burin a little bit more, and I'm going to ratchet. Let's see, I did it twice that time, and I want my lines to gradually get further apart. So 1, I'm going to ratchet 3 times this time. Okay, And so I'm just making a small series of parallel lines so you can see the line depth change. And I'll do maybe 2 more just so you can see it really well. The line depth and the space in between. So this time I'm gonna ratchet a lot more. And again, this is maybe not demonstrating the minuscule measurements that you can, that are possible with this machine, but I just want it to be able to show up for you. Okay, and so I'm just making a small series of parallel lines so you can see the line depth change. And I'll do maybe 2 more just so you can see it really well. So think of this as a magnified drawing. Okay, and I'll do 1 more here, and then I'll show you how you can turn the bed to make radial lines or lines that kind of fall over or lines that go diagonal to your block. So I'm gonna ratchet this 4 times. And then maybe at the end we can just make some much finer adjustments. So I'm lifting this up, I'm placing it. Maybe at the end we can just make some much finer adjustments. So I'm lifting this up, I'm placing it, gently dragging it through. And so you can see that really nice fine line. So now maybe I want my lines to look like they're falling over a little bit. To do that, I want to turn the press bed. There is a crank here that turns your press bed. There are numbers around the press bed, and usually this machine has a little piece broken off. There is a metal piece that comes up where you can align that. And
So there are numbers on top of the bed.
that's right. And then there is...
So it's like a little dial that you could dial into a specific number or move it over just a tiny bit.
That's right.
And are the numbers degrees?
Yes.
Yes.
So it's 180 degrees all the way around.
So I'm just turning mine a little bit because this is more free-form art piece. And I'm gonna lift my burin again and just come in. I'm gonna keep this really fine line weight. If it's showing up on the camera, I think it looks nice. And draw. So you can see perfectly equal line weight to what I had before at a diagonal, and I'm just going to maybe move the bed over and make another diagonal line that's falling over a little bit more. So remember to do that. I'm going to come back to my right-left ratchet. And again, I'm going to space these lines out pretty far just so I can move across this block here. And I wanted to turn my press bed a little more. Oops, I think I was going this way before. Lift this up, move it through. So in this case, I'm just making some diagonal lines, but if I wanted to make some radial lines that came out from the center and made a sunburst or a flower or something of that feeling, I can find the center. You know, my block is already centered on the bed. I can find the center of my block and begin all of my lines there and turn it. It'll always come out from the same spot. I can talk about that more in just a minute. So let me just make one more diagonal line, and I'll talk about making circles. And then this particular machine also has what's called a wave bar, so I'll talk about that. So I move this over, I'm going to turn it a little more this other way. I'm going to turn it a lot so it's a little more dramatic and move it over some more. Nice diagonal line. And of course, you know, I'm just going at a diagonal. I could turn the block perpendicular to get some really serious 90-degree cross-hatching action going. So that's that. Now I'm going to disengage this and move the block over quite a bit so I can make the circle. So I moved the bed over some so I can have a clean spot on my block to make a circle. So we're just gonna make a circle. And I have moved the block over so I have a kind of a clean spot here. And what I want to do, actually, I want to make a set of concentric circles that move out. So what I'm going to do again is just choose where I want it on my block, and actually I might need to move it over just a little more this way. Okay. And then I'm going to position my stylus and my burin where I want my inner circle to begin. And what I'm going to do is just turn the bed of the press to make the circle, but just to make sure that my stylus doesn't move back and forth and make a wonky circle, is there are some dogs here that you probably can't see. But I'm just going to loosen them and bring them in and lock them on either side of this dial so that it can't slide back and forth. If you're working on a larger block or a commission piece or something close to your heart that you really just cannot handle things going wrong, you can also add a clamp on here. It's extra security. So now there's a crank right here that's going to turn the bed of the press, and oh, this is making a much bigger circle than I bargained for, which is cool. Oh, it's right on the edge of the block, but it's not going off. Cool.
Excellent.
Yep. That worked out pretty well.
And you can, I'm sorry, you can ratchet in, since you're right on the edge of the block. Instead of concentric circles going outwards, you can bring them in.
Yeah, so I want to go, well, let's just see here. So now I'm not going to move my burin out of the way like I normally would if I was making lines. So I'm just going to hold it up while I ratchet, and I think I'm going to ratchet in this direction, but I'm not sure. But let's just see what happens. I think I need to turn it this way. Yeah. Woohoo. So I ratcheted once. So for all those lines, I was ratcheting several times just so to make sure you could see the distance showing up on camera. But now I only did it once, and there you'll see a close-up, I'm sure, of how close together but perfectly fine and consistent that line is. And I'm going to make another one that is just barely further apart than that. So I'm just making a third concentric circle, and I'll make a fourth that's just slightly further apart. So I have concentric circles, just barely getting further apart as I go in toward the center of my circle. Okay, and so I'm just barely ratcheting more and more. As I go in to make my lines further apart. And this is looking pretty cool for a test block. I'll do just one more, and I'm gonna ratchet 4 times. So there's, again, you can really see the space. And this is something that normally you would not talk to anyone while you do this. You would turn your phone off. You really, all of your concentration is on the machine and the block, so that you don't lose track of, how many times did I ratchet, how many lines did I make. You really want to be in it. Okay, so we've made straight lines, we've made deep ones and shallow ones and moved across the block. We've made some angled lines, or diagonal, overlapping, concentric circles that spread out as they move inward. There's another feature on this rolling machine called the wave bar. And to engage it, there's a dial here. Well, let me see. Before I engage it though, let me just show you. There's a dial here in the front of the machine. When I turn it, you can see this whole bar turns. And there are kind of these little like index marks or fingerprints, and I can choose which one I want. And I can even turn this inner dial to move the whole bar forward and backwards so that I can determine where my line is going to start. This will make more sense once I make a line, which I'm just going to go ahead and do by engaging the wave bar. So could you see the whole stylus move in? And there's, you know, a little piece of metal that comes out and rests inside this waved impression. Remember, I had locked my dogs here so that my stylus wouldn't move and I could make concentric circles. So I'm going to loosen them up and move them out of the way. Okay. And let's see, my block is at an angle and I just want to straighten it up so I don't feel disoriented. Okay, I'm just going to place my mark. Maybe I'll make it a little bit deeper just so it's easier for you to see. And so nice, you can see how yeah, I'm just going to go all the way through the block here. Isn't that nice? And this is like this nice gentle movement. And I will move my block over a little bit. So you can make some really sophisticated patterns, again, from parallel hatching, cross hatching, varying the depth of the piece, of the lines, I should say. And you can make the wavy lines into a radial pattern also, if that's what you want to do. So this is the one thing I didn't talk about. So I'm going to go ahead and engage this bar. And what this is going to do is this is going to help me with my radial pattern. So I've made 3 wavy lines and I want to, instead of ratcheting side to side, I want to turn the bed at precise increments such as this. So just like the other ratchet system, there is a stop. Again, I've been making large increments so they show up, but if you want some really minuscule movement, you can just set that stop and really make some very fine adjustments. I'm going to keep my adjustments big. And so again, instead of moving the bed back and forth, it turned it a little bit. Ooh, that was very subtle. So I'm working on this radial pattern now. I'm gonna make it a little bit less subtle by doing 4 ratchets. And again, I don't know if I said this on camera before, but this is an antique machine and these brass parts, this machine is designed to ratchet, so you can just slide the handle down. It catches the teeth and moves the piece, but we don't want to have to make a new dial. So that's why you're not hearing me ratchet. I'm lifting this little piece up as I go, just to save the life of the teeth on those gears. Okay. All right, and that looks nice. I'll make one more line here and think about what I might have forgot to say. So, or maybe let me just do a little review here. We have the bed of the machine. We have the right to left adjuster. The knob on the side moves the bed at huge, unmeasured increments to position your block. The ratchet moves the bed back and forth in very fine increments. You can set the lock here to really fine tune your adjustments, especially if you're making a series of parallel lines that you want equidistant, then you know that you're always ratcheting the exact same amount between lines. To rotate the bed a drastic degree, you want to make sure this bar is not engaged, and you just use the side crank and it will turn the bed. If you are in the middle of engraving, you're making radial lines, or even just, because radial lines, and you do want those fine increments, again, you just want to engage this arm. The gears engage underneath, and again, you can use, set your adjustment, fine tune it, ratchet it, it turns the bed at fine increments. If you are making a circle, then you want to make sure that you first position your burin on the block, do any adjustments for the bed back and forth or around. You're going to lock the dogs up against this so that your burin doesn't move, and you make the circles by turning the crank here. Anytime you're making a line, you're gently going to rest your finger on this dial above the burin, and just remember this dial, when you turn it right or left, raises and lowers the burin to change your line weight. To engage the wave bar, you're just going to turn this little dial here, and it's going to move the burin in and out against the wave bar.
How do you change the wave?
To change the wave, you're going to use this dial here. It's going to turn the wave bar to big waves or little waves. And again, if you're working on a precise image and you don't want to start at the top of a wave, you want to start at the bottom, you can turn the smaller dial and it's going to move the wave bar back and forth so you can really decide where you want to start. I think that's it. I think that's all the parts and what you're gonna do.
So now this block, now that it's finished being engraved with the ruling machine, what happens with it next?
Right. So then you can unlock the dogs and pull your block out and go in by hand with the tool and swell the lines in certain areas. Carve off the edge of the block anywhere you didn't go off the edge, any kind of stippling or clearing out of areas. You would do that all by hand now. Probably anything you do, you're going to want to go in with your hand and just fine tune it or finish it up afterward.